Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Data Analytics Chat, where we discuss the exciting world of data analytics, discussing the evolving landscape and the challenges that it brings. Today, we're going to talk about MLOps in a business environment. I guess growing area for businesses looking to scale in the ML scene. So let me introduce today's special guest, Alexander Machado. Welcome, Alexander.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for the invitation.
Not a problem. So, like I said, it's becoming more popular, I should say, MLOps. But I guess do you want to give a brief overview, an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. Yeah, my name is, as you said, Alexander Machado. I am heading the Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence at Apply AI. And formerly, I was the head of MLOps processes and in our company. For those that you don't know about Apply AI, we're the largest initiative for the application of artificial intelligence in Europe. And our goal is to support companies basically to come into the AI age by creating trustworthy AI to create the future we desire to live in. From a background, so I studied basically here in Munich at the Technical University, electrical engineering. My master was in telecommunications. And after that, I started in the data science at BMW doing my thesis and my internships. There I was on the Max Planck Society working as a big data scientist in the big data analytics group. And then I came to Apply AI, where I was working as a senior AI engineer. Then I was heading the MLOps processes team, and now I'm heading the Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence.
Brilliant. Cool. Welcome. I would give a brief intro about MLOps, but I think it's going to be my first one for you. So we'll dive straight in. So, no, what is MLOps and why does it matter for businesses?
A very good question. Maybe to put it simple, so now there is a big hype about AI, different models, Norwegian AI, and so on, which is very good, very fancy, very important. But of course, if you want to bring value to the business, you have to deploy these models into production and make sure they remain performance over time. And that's exactly the goal of MLOps, how we can support progress through the whole ML life cycle, from project planning until deployment, including monitoring, and all the best practices across both points. And in that sense, it's very important to have a good envelope system if you want to scale the number of AI use cases in your company, and also in case if you want to basically have a smooth across each of the steps of the ML life cycle.
Cool. So it's basically all to do with more efficiency for a business.
Exactly. So if you have a good ML platform, then for you it's going to be easier to scale the amount of use cases. So at the beginning, maybe you start with one or two. Their MLOps is not that relevant, but as soon as you get three, four, five, six, etc., if you want to go to 100 or thousands, MLOps
Mhm.
become an essential activity in your pipeline, in your company.
So would it be like the technologies you've got, the easier it is the more efficient it is, or is it still more about the process?
I think it's both. So when you see the definition of MLOps, there are many of them,
Yeah.
and one of them is a set of tools and principles that support the progress through the ML life cycle. So at Apply AI, we basically see it from two angles, as you said. Number one, processes. So we have different frameworks that we follow
Mm.
across every project so that we can optimize and reduce the probability of failure of a project. And also we have the tools part. So we have different
Mhm.
tool landscapes, evaluations, open source, closed source, in the cloud, and so on, so we can basically provide our partners with the best advice of what they have to use as tools.
Okay, cool, interesting. So I guess for businesses, you mentioned there's different frameworks. So how would you go about structuring a team? And I guess what sort of skill sets would you look for?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Actually, that was one of the biggest pain points that we saw basically about MLOps. Many people say, okay, sure, we can do MLOps. But the question is, what skills we need across the life cycle, in what part of the ML life cycle, and also how many people, for example, we need.
Mhm.
Exactly what that was the focus of Applied AI's working group last year. We focused exactly on this, the amount of roles and responsibilities to basically develop not only use cases, but also develop MLOps. And in that sense, we came up with a framework that we named the ML Skill Profiles Framework that consists on about 10 roles. We named them the skill profiles because actually a role, people thought it was about a person, so one person, one role. In this case, a skill profile is more like a function, basically. So one person could have two, three, four, five functions if you have a very small company, of course. But the bigger your company, then yeah, ideally one person will have one or two functions at the end. Yeah. So in this case, we have two type of roles. Let's name them ML skill profiles. So one of them are those key profiles that have to do with the direction of the company. So you have, of course, the management roles like heads of AI, heads of data, CIO, the chief information
Mhm.
officer. Then you will have the next layer. So what you have, in case you are in a regulated environment, you need some roles to set up the guidelines to comply with regulations, for example, or best practices. And in the next layer, you have the architects. In this case, it's the data architects, solutions architects, ML architects. They are in charge of creating a platform following all these guidelines. And finally, you have the users, that is the data scientist, the data engineer, ML engineer, and so on. They make use of these platforms or templates to basically apply them in their AI use case. So this is a typical structure that we're proposing at
Mhm.
Apply.
Okay. And is that been just like is it just a template you've used for in multiple times then, or does it ever change?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good question also because every framework, of course, is just a model. So it's a best
Mhm.
practice. But depending on your company specifics, budget, amount of people, maturity level, etc., you might use less or more of these roles and responsibilities, of course.
Mhm.
And at Apply AI, we have basically an offering where we go to the companies and based on all these inputs, we define the best setup about roles and responsibilities in their
Mhm.
company. But always we start with the best practice and then we customize it toward the customer's needs.
Okay. Brilliant. So I'll just move to the next question. So within this, why is effective management crucial in MLOps?
Yeah, that's also a very good question because a big challenge also from many MLOps practitioners is to convince the C-level or the higher manager that
Mm.
MLOps is necessary. So the challenge with MLOps is that it's like a smoke detector. When nothing happens, you don't. They will ask, "Why am we investing so much money on these processes and tools when it seems like nothing is breaking and so on?" Nevertheless, when a problem happens, and actually you basically, let's say your performance of the model in production goes under a threshold and you detect it, that means you need to return your pipeline automatically because let's say it's a use case where you will call me at 4 a.m. Of course, that's a bad practice. You should have
Mhm.
to automate as much, you need to try to automate as much as possible. In that way, basically MLOps will basically support you to solve the issue automatically. That's a big challenge at the moment, like many companies are facing, because yeah, it's very hard to convince C-level that MLOps, first of all, is very important. Fortunately, also when you see it from the other angle, from the angle of regulations, so now in case you're doing an AI system that is high risk, basically you are enforcing, the European Commission is enforcing MLOps best practices. That's basically in the past from our side was more like a suggestion, but now actually it's going to be enforced in case you have a system that could harm basically safety, health, or fundamental human rights of people in the European Union.
Yeah. No. So it's obviously like many AI projects, getting stakeholder buy-in is a big obstacle.
Yeah, exactly. Also, maybe another one. So we have actually a couple of publications on that. One is named the Enterprise Guide to ML. And in the last section, it's exactly that. What are the best practices for top management or management of MLOps
Mhm.
processes? Another one could be that a lot of companies just use AI for the sake that is cool, it's good marketing, and so on, which actually is a bad practice. You should only use AI in case you really need. Because if, for example, a rule-based function would solve your problem, when you're using AI, you are creating an amount of overhead that actually is very negative for your company. Definitely, that's a very bad practice.
Yeah.
So, and yeah,
Yeah. It's important to stick to your strategic goals. Like Gen AI, a lot of businesses got sidetracked last year. There's a new shiny tool come out where it really is obviously you want to keep aligned to your strategic goals because you can easily spend a lot of money on going out of process or looking at other alternatives where like, you've already got a clear goal in mind. You just because the new shiny toys come out, businesses get sidetracked, and we see that quite a bit from a lot when I speak to a lot of business leaders.
exactly. And maybe also maybe another one could be the fact that every time you do an AI project, it's a bit different than software, right? So in software engineering, if you tell me, Alex, how long will it take you to make a web page with two buttons and a picture of a cat? I will tell you in case I know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe it will take me, I don't know, 1 hour and a half, for example. But if you ask me, Alex, we have a folder with 1,000 pictures of cats and dogs. How long would it take you to classify them with 99.9% of accuracy? That's something that I cannot tell you because you don't know. It depends on many variables, like, for example, the data. how
Yeah.
easy to is, also the models, the state of the art of the AI models that I want to use, etc., etc. So you need to have an exploratory process to understand actually the feasibility of your use case.
Mm.
And that's at the end, from my perspective, also one of the key management best practices. So try to break down your AI use case into phases in a way that you have quality gates that allows you to identify how likely or feasible is your use case after you make a short exploration. In that way, you don't have to invest 5 months on a project that maybe already in the months 2 or 1, you have realized there is no feasibility or potential. And that's
Yeah.
basically something we propose also as well.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. And then I guess what does a typical project life cycle look like in MLOps? And I guess how does it differ to other projects?
Mhm. Yeah, so in the case of AI, something we had this working group 2 years ago. We made a deep dive of life cycles of different companies, including Microsoft, Amazon, Google, etc. Basically, what we try to understand is the key activities, also the key phases. But we realized there were some gaps in some of the life cycles 2 years ago. Maybe now they are already fixed, but they were not focusing too much on artifact management with that aspects as data versioning, data management, or model management, experiment tracking, and so on. And based on that, basically, the Apply AI, we have a working group with our partners, and we develop our Apply AI machine learning lifecycle. That's also one publication that we have in this enterprise guide to ML. In that sense, the first phase basically is the scoping phase, where very important to understand what is the use case goal, what is the success metric. So is it precision, recall, F1 score, but how much actually? Is it 0.80, 0.90? And this decision, of course, doesn't come from the data scientist, but actually comes from the domain experts. For example, if it's a doctor who's going to use the system, they are the ones who have to tell us how much is the minimum performance they need for success. And in that sense, basically the scoping phase is about defining the use case, but also we make a deep dive on the data that we want to use for the use case, because we can basically in a workshop of a couple of hours identify how good or bad the data quality of a data set is in order to decide if it makes sense to actually start the project or not. And that's also something we do. That we name this section the technical scoping of the planning phase. So after we finalize the planning phase, so we go to the second phase, that is the data engineering stage. In this case, what we do is we design the data ingestion pipeline. Also, we pre-process the data, we clean it, aggregate it, and so on. We create features, and also we manage the data. So our goal is to basically create reproducibility in the system by creating data lineage, data versioning, having data dependency graphs in place, and so on. After the data part is ready, of course, the next part in the life cycle is the modeling stage. So it's formed by model training. So we have to compare different models, select the best one. We do have a parameter tuning and so on. And then we need to, of course, manage all these experiments by having an experiment tracker system in place. Also, something we use quite a lot is the model registry. So it's basically a database that allows us to see what model is in what stage at the moment. So, for example, if you're training multiple models, they will be basically being compared. But if you like one, you can basically promote it to the next stage, and you can have multiple stages onto production. After you have your model in the last stage of production, finally you can deploy it and monitor it with your best practices in the company. So that's a typical life cycle. Very important. After monitoring, many companies were thinking that's the end of a project, but that's the beginning, I would say, of what probably the second half, that you have to automate anything that can go wrong and also integrate your model into the final device, if it's a car, the smartphone, etc.
Mhm. So does that like more to minimize risk, that second part? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So we have these quality gates
Yeah.
based on the phases.
Okay.
We decide actually, we have a workshop based on all the information we learn, if we persevere to the next phase, or actually we stop the project and go back to the planning phase and select the next project with the highest priority.
Okay. Cool. Cool. And then I see. Well, I guess then what I mean, what common risks, challenges associated with MLOps projects?
That's a good question. So in general, I think one challenge is the amount of tools. I would say in the last couple of years, the amount of tools of MLOps exploded. You have tens of maybe a lot of tools actually for every activity in the life cycle.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to get the signal out of the noise. Also, unfortunately, what we see is in the landing page, all these new vendors, of course, promise everything. They list out a lot of functionalities that we would need. Nevertheless, when you install them and use them for a couple of days or hours, you realize that there was an overstatement. It was a bit the performance because of that in our side. It's not enough to compare landing pages, but actually we install the tools that we consider are the most interesting ones, and we define a clear evaluation criteria, and we compare them basically in all these dimensions like easy of use, easy of setup, etc., etc. We have for every activity in the life cycle a different assessment criteria. The problem with that is that it's very time consuming, right? Because installing a tool, having to test it, maybe even have an example use case and try it out takes a lot of time. But we figured out that's the only way. Otherwise, it's a bit complicated at the moment.
Yeah. The number of tools, is that the biggest challenge then? And I guess the integration part would be associated to that.
Yeah, so there are different options actually when you're doing AI projects. Because, for example, you have also tools that are end to end that involve every single step that you need,
Yeah.
and they have their own proprietary activities in the life cycle. And of course, the challenge with them is that they are quite expensive, so they are commercial tools. So the
Mhm.
open source tools tends to be basically a bit slimmer in that sense. They have only one, two, or a couple of activities of the life cycle. The problem with that is that then you have to basically glue them together, right, to make sure that they talk to each other in a smooth way. So I would say the integration part is also a challenge, but lately we have had more and more tools that are actually focusing on this integration aspect, which makes our life easier. But still, I think there is
Okay,
a lot for improvement there.
cool. And then I think because of the hype, well, Gen AI, there's a lot more tools that have come out. Is that impacted like the MLOps like life cycle? Has it made it like faster or quicker to do implement, or has it created more work?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't grasp it.
As like with the like Gen AI now, there's a lot more tools on the market. Has that made the process even longer, or has it been able to speed it up in terms of because you've got the more tools available to integrate?
Yeah, that's also a good point. So in the case of Gen AI, I would say the life cycle is also very similar. The only difference, so the phases are the same, but you have a
Mhm.
few more activities inside the phases. For example, prompt engineering or fine-tuning models and so on. There are activities that you didn't have before. Nevertheless, I would say the cycle remains similar. It's just a bit deeper with more activities to do. Of course, the challenge there is that we have more activities. That mean more aspects or dimensions where to evaluate tools. That means we have
Mhm.
tools for more activities as before. Yeah, so that's I would say the main challenge.
Okay, brilliant. And then moving on, then how do you manage the scalability of ML ops projects?
So in that case of scalability, we figure out basically a few years ago, some companies were basically doing everything together. When you think of the life cycle, you have data, model deployment. They were actually doing a bad practice that was everything in one server and everything scaled together or not. A recommendation that we clearly basically see in the market and we recommend is to isolate the data part from the model part, from the deployment part. Because, for example, you can have a use case with a lot of data. So you have to do a lot of data preprocessing. So you should be able to scale data. But maybe in that use case, the model part is very small. It's a simple model. And then
Yeah.
you don't have a huge server that scales for the model. Or could be vice versa. Maybe you have a small data set in the use case, but you need to use a very fancy model because it's a belongs to a domain that requires big models. Also, in the case of deployment, you should be able to scale deployment independent from the other two because you could have a lot of requests, for example, from the users, millions, and so on. So you should be able to scale the deployment servers so that you can fulfill, basically respond all the requests. So the best practice would be try to basically scale independently in each of the part of the life
Mhm.
cycle.
And with the scalability, do you look like, say, do you predict 5 years, 10 years in advance, or even further?
Repeat, please.
Sorry, my English accent. So within sort of like predicting the scalability in say in the future, what do you tend to look for? Do you look like 5 years, 10 years in advance, or is it more aligned to the project?
Yeah, I think I didn't grasp the question fully. So you're thinking about scalability in the
Yeah,
next.
how do you predict the future like scalability?
That's a really hard question.
Yeah,
So really, yeah, that's a tricky one in that sense because of course the data is getting year by year bigger,
yeah,
models as well. So you should be able also in the infrastructure layer to catch up with all these new developments, right? But I think in general, quite likely some of the steps will be commoditized in the future because you see more and more tools taking care of this and for you. So you have some managed services, even in the cloud and also on-prem. I would say at some point this scalability issue would be a commodity for the MLOps engineers.
Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. And then obviously you touched base on this about obviously the amount of tools, etc. How do you choose the right infrastructure and tools for your MLOps projects?
Yeah, I would say I would start first of all with the requirements that you have in your use cases that are
Mhm.
typical in your company. Also the limitations, because there are companies where, for example, you're not allowed to go to the cloud, even though the cloud is in Germany or Frankfurt, etc.
Mhm.
So for those cases, for example, you might need to go on-prem 100%. So you will have two parallel tracks. One is the cloud-based development, the other one is on-prem, and the third option is the hybrid one. So first of all, understand what you can do, because if you cannot use the clouds, then you have to focus on the third one. In that case, if you're on-prem, then you have also a couple of options. One of them is the end-to-end solutions, which are commercial, are a bit expensive. Option two is you have to develop your own basically stack by gluing together all these open source tools, for example.
Mhm.
And all the patterns, I have seen them quite often. So I don't think there is a clear pattern where companies tend to go if you're on-prem.
Yeah.
And the simple case is when you can use the cloud, then in the cloud also you can do basically all this stacking. So I think more and more over the time, I see services like Azure and AWS. They are integrated tools that are open source, like
Yeah.
MLflow, for example, Delta Lake, and so on. And basically, they just stack it for you. You just import them and use them actually there on the cloud directly.
Okay, cool. And then I guess final question then. What's the future look like for MLOps in businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it looks still very brilliant because at the end, the main goal of MLOps is to make sure that your projects go to production successfully and remain performant over
Mhm.
time. And that's something that's true today, but also will be true in 10 years. So I would say MLOps still will be very strong, even though now the hype is about Gen AI and other
Mhm.
parts. Gen AI is nothing else than the model training part, model selection, fine tuning, and so on. But still, you need to take this model to production. And you have now this new, basically, subcategory of MLOps that is named LLM Ops, so large language model operations.
Yeah.
And there are some limitations on that. That's very interesting that they have all the activities, and more than 60-70% is the same as MLOps. So
Mm,
only you have this new aspect that I mentioned before that are the novelties.
mm.
But yeah, overall, I think MLOps is here to stay. And now with the topic of regulations, basically, if you're high risk, you have to comply to the European AI Act. So
Mhm.
MLOps actually, I would say 60 to 70% of the requirements of the European AI Act. So MLOps
Yeah.
is here to stay, definitely.
Cool. And then you mentioned obviously the different businesses obviously don't utilize cloud. Do you think obviously as time evolves, more and more businesses will start to go onto the cloud? And do you think that's going to be like the more the go-to sort of space? That's going to be the growing field.
Yeah, so that's already a trend I have seen in the
Yeah.
last couple of years. We organized this event that is named the MLOps Day, and we did some surveys to the participants about them, basically how much they use on-prem, cloud, and so on. And clearly, cloud was an overwhelming number. Also, we have seen some publications about the time series of the cloud, and basically, it's really accelerating quite a lot. So more and more companies are going to the cloud. Maybe they are trusting more the privacy. At the beginning, I think about privacy, they were a bit afraid, but
Mhm.
more and more, I see the trend that even big companies tend to go more and more to the cloud without any problem. So yeah, definitely. If you ask me, I would say, yeah, I think the cloud market share is going to be larger and larger over the next couple of years.
Interesting. No, I think obviously the crowd, yeah, if you look at facts and figures on the cloud, does seem like it's growing, and obviously I guess that's going to impact, yeah, obviously you see businesses going that way. But yeah, cool. Oh, brilliant. Cool. No, I really enjoyed the conversation with yourself. Yeah, thanks for your time, and it's been great having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much, man. It was really great being in the podcast.